Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. In this video, I want to look at an article by Al Mohler. This is called Christians, Conscience, and the Looming 2020 Election. I've been talking about this theme recently. John Piper, well-known pastor, author, and founder of Desiring God, wrote Policies, Persons, and Paths to Ruin, Pondering the Implications of the 2020 Election. And I did a video on that article talking about John Piper's position on the election, and basically he wasn't really coming out pro-Republican or pro-Democrat. He was saying that as a Christian he feels both parties, particularly in voting for president, to vote for either party this year would be voting for a path to destruction. So there were a lot of responses to John Piper's article that came out recently, and I talked about one by Dr. Michael Brown. I looked at that last time. And then another response that I noticed was by Wayne Grudem. I haven't looked at that yet, but I know some of you probably have read that. I encourage you to read these different articles. They're really interesting. And I might look at the one by Wayne Grudem, but I really wanted to look at this one today by Al Mohler. I did read over it, and it's really good. I'm not going to go into all of the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to highlight some things from this article. Now, Al Mohler's article is not really a direct response to John Piper, but I will say right now that Al Mohler, a Southern Baptist leader, is coming out in favor of voting for Donald Trump this time, even though he didn't vote for Donald Trump in the last election. Before I look at Al Mohler's article in more detail, I just want to remind you that if you haven't subscribed to this channel and you like Christian nerdy content like this, please subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you know when I upload a new video. So let's look at Al Mohler's article here, and what I really want to do here is just highlight some things where he's really talking here about his defense of Trump, kind of defending why he would vote for Trump. He's also saying here in this article why he thinks evangelical Christians should not vote Democrat. And then he also talks about the place of politics in the Christian life and how that fits in. So this is dated October 26, just a couple days ago, Christians, Conscience, and the Looming 2020 Election. He talks about the character of the two choices here, and he basically says that when it comes down to it, he would rather actually have Biden as a neighbor rather than Trump, but he's not voting for a neighbor, he's voting for a president, and so he says that right here. He also talks about the fact that he's a Christian and he is a classical conservative in the Western tradition. And then he writes this: I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. Repulsed by his character and unable to see him as a conservative, I voted for neither major party candidate. I made a symbolic vote. I had to hope that Hillary Clinton would not be elected president, but it seemed almost determined. As we know now, it was not. Having argued loudly for the resignation of President Bill Clinton on national television many times over in the wake of the Monica Lewinsky affair, I felt that I could not vote for Donald Trump without hypocrisy. I even went so far as to say that if I voted for Donald Trump, I would have to apologize to Bill Clinton. Well, I am voting for Donald Trump in 2020, and I make no apology to Bill Clinton. I do apologize, but my apology is for making a dumb statement that did not stand the test of time. I am not about to apologize to Bill Clinton, who stands guilty of having desecrated the presidency by his gross sexual immorality while in office. I still believe in the necessity of character for public office, but I have had to think more deeply about how character is evaluated in a historic context. So Mohler here is talking about how he doubted that Trump would fulfill his promises, particularly in regard to the pro-life stance. And then he says it is the oddest thing. The candidate who had been pro-abortion became pro-life. I have no means of reading Donald Trump's heart on this issue, but I can easily evaluate his actions. In terms of presidential action, Donald Trump has been the most effective and consequential pro-life president of the modern age. Furthermore, in both executive actions and court appointments, President Trump has gone far beyond what would have been politically necessary to secure his base. He has staked his place in history and has defied the accommodationist temptation and has given pro-life Americans more than any other president. In April, I said in public what was implicit in my commentary and actions since January 2017. I would vote for Donald Trump in 2020. And I already have. I sincerely hope that Donald Trump, and not Joe Biden, will be elected President of the United States on November 3rd. Then he talks here about the problems of what a Biden-Harris administration would bring from his evangelical Christian perspective. He talks about the Democrat Party being what he calls a culture of death. And he says in the next paragraph, "This tears at my heart like no other issue. I agree that there are many other issues that press on the Christian conscience. Questions of economic policy and foreign affairs and energy and the stewardship of the earth, the searing pain of racial injustice, and the unraveling of our social fabric demand Christian response and urgency. Christians must be concerned about questions of immigration policy and refugees, and these issues defy the simplifications of the soundbite and tweet culture. But human dignity and the sanctity of human life are even more basic truths, and I believe there is no hope for defending human dignity for all if it is denied in the womb." A little further, he says, "We are tempted to separate personal character and political policies as if they can be cleanly divided, but character is policy, and policy is character. Let me be as clear as I know possible. President Trump's behavior on Twitter and his divisive comments and sub-presidential behavior are an embarrassment to me, constantly. His arrogance and ego and constant need for adulation drive me to distraction. But character is some strange combination of the personal, the principled, and the practical. Let me put it another way. I cannot accept the argument that a calm man who affirms the dismembering of babies in the womb has a superior character to a man who rants like Genghis Khan but acts to preserve that life. In my ideal world, I would vote for a candidate in whom the personal, the principled, and the practical earn my admiration. I do not live in that world. I live in this world, and I must act accordingly." So that was really interesting. And then he talks about Trump protecting liberty, and particularly religious liberty. And then he contrasts that with Biden, who he says would infringe really on religious liberty. He ties religious liberty with the issue of LGBTQ issues and how those really impact each other, as well as the transgender revolution and how that will reshape the entire society and what Joe Biden has had to say about that. And then he says a little later, evangelical Christians are almost certain to vote in overwhelming numbers for the re-election of President Trump. This is not a surprise to anyone who has been awake during the last 40 years of American life. Ever since 1980, the pattern has been very consistent. Evangelical Christians have voted by large percentages for the Republican ticket. Every 4 years, the mainstream media claim to be shocked by this pattern, which turns out to be the same pattern that supposedly shocked them 4 years previously. The basic partisan divide reveals an even more basic worldview divide, and the pattern shows no sign of changing. No one should be shocked. The majority of evangelicals continue to vote in a predictable pattern that reveals evangelical concerns. He talks about how every election cycle there are groups that call themselves evangelical but come out in favor of the Democratic candidate. He even mentions evangelicals for McGovern back in 1972. Then a little later he says, "There will be evangelicals who cannot in good conscience vote for Donald Trump. I understand their predicament. But not voting for Donald Trump, though a political decision in itself, is not the same as voting for Joe Biden. This is beyond my moral imagination. I also recognize that I know brothers and sisters in Christ who see this differently. The vast majority of black voters in America vote regularly and predictably for the Democratic ticket, and have since 1960. Like the pattern of white evangelical voting, this is not a surprise. There are long historical reasons why both are so. With my black brothers and sisters, I make my best case for how I see the issues. They have every right to do the same. We each have a vote. Both of us will answer to God for that vote. We earnestly seek to persuade the other. We will likely vote differently in the end. We remain brothers and sisters in Christ. Then he gets into here what voting by your convictions means within his context of the Southern Baptist movement. And he says, Christian fellowship is based on shared convictions and common faith in Christ. In my denomination, that means shared passion for the gospel, shared commitment to cooperative ministry, and shared convictions about marriage, the sanctity of human life, human beings made male and female, and the wholeness of the faith once for all delivered to the saints. I know of no church or denomination that makes voting choices a matter of church discipline or church order. It is the convictions themselves that constitute grounds for church discipline and church order. On the other side of this election, brothers and sisters who share the same convictions will have to find a way to work together to forge a way forward. If politics becomes primary, the church is reduced to a political party. Politics is never off the horizon, but if it dominates the horizon, Christian fellowship is undermined. And then he brings the article to a conclusion. I will leave a link to this article in the video description of this video so you can read the entire thing for yourself if you'd like to. So as with Dr. Brown's article, I really thought that this article by Al Mohler was very well articulated. It gave a very good presentation as to why an evangelical Christian would vote for Donald Trump. And it really contrasts with what Dr. John Piper brought out in his article. And of course, Dr. John Piper made a lot of very good points. Dr. Michael Brown acknowledged that. Al Mohler here isn't really addressing John Piper, but I think he did a good job of explaining his position. It's interesting, too, that Al Mohler did not vote for President Trump in 2016, but now he does plan to vote for President Trump. I appreciated what he said there, that he had initially said he would have to apologize to Bill Clinton if he voted for Trump, but instead he's apologizing for making what he sees as a pretty dumb statement. And I think that was cool that he owned up to that and just said, look, I've changed my viewpoint on this, and it's because of the changes I've seen in President Trump, particularly in how he is carrying out his presidency in a way that I did not foresee in 2016. So that's very interesting. Everybody seems to take Trump's character seriously. Al Mohler does talk about being embarrassed by some of the things that Trump does. I actually think from my observations that a lot of younger people actually like some of those things that maybe, and I am generalizing, the older generation might find embarrassing. So when Trump puts out kind of an ad that you think, what? Did he really make that an ad? Younger people a lot of times find a lot of humor in it. And that's coming sometimes from younger people who don't necessarily support Trump. The same with Twitter. He's using that medium in a way that a lot of younger people find effective. Now, they don't always agree with him, obviously, but I do think he is playing to a different generation there when he does some of these things. And I think that also gets into the different modes of President Trump, that when he's on Twitter, he's in a certain mode, and he's using that medium in a certain way. Now, of course, we could have a lot of debate as to whether he should be doing that, but that's basically what I see happening. But that embarrasses Dr. Mohler, and he says, again, character is important, but that policies he's bringing out here actually tie into character. So even if someone is calm and doesn't rant on Twitter, if they're pushing for policies that are destructive, then that actually does say something about their character. And that's the point that he's making about Biden. He might be a calmer person, or he might seem more respectable in some ways than Trump, but his policies betray what Al Mohler would see as good character. The one other thing about this article, if Dr. Al Mohler ever watches this video, I'm sure he's going to watch it, but one thing I would want to know is what is Dr. Mohler's response to Phil Vischer and Skye Jethani that I talked about recently, where they were basically giving a presentation saying that who we vote for president doesn't actually impact the abortion issue as much as we think it will. Now, whether they're right on that completely, I don't know, but I would love to hear Dr. Mohler's response to that if he hasn't already given one. I'm not aware of it if he has, but I'd love to hear that. So there are definitely Christians, I've talked about this, that are saying that You don't have to vote for Trump. It's not a good thing to vote for Trump. But here I'm bringing out some articles that are saying evangelical Christians should vote for Trump, and I'm trying to show here the reasoning behind evangelical Christians who are voting for Trump. So you've seen Piper's viewpoint, you've seen Phil Vischer, Skye Jitani, some of the things that they've said, and if you've been watching my videos, you've seen some of the responses as well, like this. I hope this is all interesting and helpful to you. I'd love to hear what you think. It's always interesting to see the discussion in the comment section, so feel free to leave those comments. Just try to keep them positive and helpful to discussion. But thank you so much for watching this video and listening to some of my thoughts from A Frisch Perspective.